Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. It is a Go Farther series episode today, and we're getting back to the lessons and tips that I'd like to share with you. And today's lesson on ways to help you do more, be happy, and surprise yourself so you can go farther is find a coach. Find a coach. So I want to jump right in and get right to this lesson today. And again, like every episode, everything I'm sharing here is just from personal experience, things that I've learned or things that I've developed over the years. Hopefully, somewhere in here, there's something that you can either adopt or adapt or both. Adopt meaning take exactly what I'm sharing and say, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to start doing that. Or adapt it and say, okay, that's a good idea. Let me adapt it to my situation just a little bit. In this particular case, this is something that I'm going to encourage you to adopt, which is find a coach. Find a coach. So I'll preface this by asking you a question. Asking you a question. I want to know if you know who these three people are. The first person is David Lee Brewer. David Lee Brewer. No Googling while you're listening. Just listen. David Lee Brewer. The second person is Tom Jackson. Tom Jackson. And the third person is Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell. So it's a little quiz here, a little trivia quiz, trivia night, if you will, here on the podcast. The reason I'm asking you if you know those three people is because David Lee Brewer is the voice coach for Beyonce. And he's been a voice coach with Beyonce way back when she was part of Destiny's Child as the music group. Tom Jackson is the performance coach for Taylor Swift. You might have heard of her as well. And so Taylor Swift, of course, has created some of the most unbelievable performances from what I've heard up on stage. Whether or not you like her music or not, it's unequivocal the impact that her performances make when she can charge $1,500 a ticket. And the third person, Bill Campbell, is a business coach or was a business coach. Bill Campbell, you may have heard of him more so than the other two simply because there was a book that came out a few years ago by Eric Schmidt called Trillion Dollar Coach. Trillion Dollar Coach. The reason it's called Trillion Dollar Coach is because it was about Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell was a business coach to, listen to this list, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Eric Schmidt, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Jack Dorsey, Dick Costolo, Sheryl Sandberg, among others. So Bill Campbell was the CEO at Intuit. He was a VP of marketing and on the board of Apple. He was also the CEO of a company called Go. And so if you've not heard of Bill Campbell, I definitely check out that book, Trillion Dollar Coach. So when Bill retired from being an executive, he coached and never got paid. I did it completely volunteer, never got paid, never took equity, never had any compensation other than his desire to help other founders and other CEOs to do better with their business. So I share those three people with you, David Lee Brewer, Tom Jackson, Bill Campbell, and the people that they coach, because I know sometimes people will say, when I talk about, do you have a coach? They'll say, well, I don't really need a coach, or I have a peer group, or I've got some friends I bounce ideas off of, and all those things. And that's great. Those are important. I think we need to have those things. I have a peer group. I have people I bounce ideas off of. At the end of the day, to be a top performer, I mean, that list of people, Beyonce, Taylor Swift, and all of those tech executives I just mentioned, those are, I think you could argue, among the top performers in the world in their chosen areas. And each of those people had a coach or have a coach in order to do more, in order to be happy, in order to surprise themselves, I'm sure, so they can go farther. So let's jump into why it's important to have a coach. And then I'll give you some examples from my personal life, ultra marathoning, and also from business life and the work that I've done. And then, of course, I want to leave you with a couple of strategies to help you get started with finding a coach. So I think when it comes to finding a coach, and I ask people, like, do you have a coach on the business side or personal side or a racing coach? A lot of the times I'll talk to friends and ask if they have a racing coach. They're like, not really. Or, like I said, they have a peer group, or I follow people on Strava, or I read blog posts, or I bought some books. I think when it comes to doing more, when it comes to being happy, when it comes to surprising yourself to go farther, I think deep down underneath, I think most of us know that we are capable of more. Now, that more doesn't necessarily mean that we think we can be up on stage like Taylor Swift, or we think we can run a multi-billion, almost trillion-dollar company like some of the companies that the leaders that I just mentioned can lead. But we also know that the same stuff is going to lead to the same results. Having a peer group is fine. The challenge with peer groups, a lot of times, is that while there might be incremental learning that each of the people in the peer group can bring to that group and those learnings, it can sometimes be slow because that peer group are exactly that. They're peers. They're not elevated professionals or coaches that have the ability to help you stretch and break through some of your personal ceilings. And a lot of times that's because we don't know, or what we do have are unknown unknowns, meaning that we don't know the things we don't know. It's one thing to know what we don't know and say, I need to do better in marketing. I need to do better in leadership. I need to do better with speaking. I need to do better with writing. It's good to know those things. You're like, okay, there's things I don't know and I need to go learn them. When a coach kicks in, it's helping you see the unknowns. And below all that, I think at least one of the fears I always have is whenever I'm going after something important, whether it's my business life, my personal life, my racing life, I always feel like, is there something I'm missing? Is there something I'm missing out there? And so a coach steps in because this coach can help to give you new strategies. What are new frameworks that you can be thinking about achieving bigger goals, bigger outcomes, bigger objectives? That coach can also help you implement new systems on how to execute on that strategy. And those systems might be, in my running world, it could be new ways of training, new ways of scheduling, new ways of doing certain workouts that I hadn't thought about before. A 7 mile run is a 7 mile run, which I can do at a nice even pace, or I can do that 7 minute run with pickups and do a little bit of sprinting in between, and I'll get more out of that 7 minute run. So it's an example of a system. And of course, we need to learn new skills. So something as simple as like, hey, I want to do better with leadership. I want to do better with speaking. I want to do better with presenting. I want to do better with marketing. I want to do better with sales. Whatever that thing is, a lot of times what it comes down to is learning certain skill sets that will help us to perform those systems or put in place those systems, and that will help us execute on those strategies. And at the end of the day, what this is really about is breaking through upper limits so that you can go further. This concept of breaking through upper limits specifically, I read in a book called, now I'm forgetting it's Gay. Oh, yes, it's Gay Hendricks. I've mentioned this book before. So Gay Hendricks wrote a book called The Big Leap. The Big Leap. And that's in that book, he talks about upper limits and lower limits. And frequently, when we're working with peer groups or we're trying to learn things on our own through blog posts or books or videos or courses or all of those things, then the challenge could be that we don't actually know. We can only learn up to our upper limits. And as I mentioned before, the purpose of having a coach is to help you understand how to break through those upper limits with new strategies, new systems, new skills to help you uncover the unknowns. So I want to dive in with two specific examples from ultra running and racing that I've done over the years, and two specific coaches that have helped me tremendously in those endurance endeavors. So the first coach that I worked with is a guy named Kevin Cody. And so this goes back to when I was doing triathlons before I got into long distance running. And I remember doing a race called the Napa Half Iron. So a half iron, basically it's half of an Ironman race. So it's a 1.2 mile swim. It's a 70.3 mile bike, and then a half marathon run. So 13.1 miles. And I was doing this race in May out here in Northern California. And in the area where I live, it actually gets quite warm. It gets quite hot. And so even in May, you could have 95-degree weather. And I was doing this race because later in June, I was going to be doing my second Ironman triathlon. It was going to be my second Ironman triathlon. And it was a race, the Ironman triathlon. The first one I did was up in Boise, Idaho. And I signed up to do the race again the following year. So the first year, I finished the race in just under 13 hours. So I came in at like 12 hours, 59 minutes, and it was 20 some odd seconds. So I just snuck under the 13-hour mark, which is really, about as middle of the pack as you can get in those races. But of course, I was thrilled to have completed my first Ironman triathlon. And a couple of the friends that I did this race with, one of them in particular is a guy named Michael. He immediately after the race, he signed up for the following year because they were offering a discount. They threw like $500 off if you sign up for next year's race. And so he's like, "Oh, you got to sign up again. You got to sign up again." I was like, "I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Let me think about it." So after a couple weeks after the race, and I was thinking through it, I thought to myself, what if I could, if I finish this race just under 13 hours, what if I could improve my time by 1 hour and finish in just under 12 hours next time? So I thought, that would be a pretty good goal. So it would be a big achievement, knock an hour off this time. I go back to the same course, the same exact, location, the same course, the same everything, so that I could compare apples to apples and see if in fact I improved. If that 1 hour improvement was in fact like more scientific, if you will, because different races have different terrain, different amount of climbing on the bike and on the run. Some of the swims are in open water, swims in lakes, others are in rivers, some are in ocean. So you don't always get, like, every race has its own personality and its own course. So doing a different race, you might fare better simply because the course is a little bit easier, right? And so as I was training the second year for this race, I was about 2 months out. So this half Iron race I was doing, I think it was early or mid-April, mid to late April. It was about 2 months away from the race. And I went out there and it was a hot, hot day. And I remember as I was finishing this race, my legs, my calves specifically, were cramping like mad, just like completely locking up. And so I was overheated. I finished the race, but really it took a lot of effort to get to the finish line with any kind of pace. And so down at the end of the finish line, you could go back down to the water where the swim part of the race was and just go cool, just sit in the water and cool off. So I'm sitting there in the water, and there's a couple other racers around me, and my calves just continue to cramp. And there's a guy standing there, and he looked pretty calm, pretty cool. And he said, "Do your legs cramp a lot like that after races?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I mean, in general, I definitely get cramps, especially when it's hot out here." And we started chatting a little bit, and he said, a lot of that's come down to maybe just need to get some more salts, more electrolytes throughout the course of your race. And we just chatted a little bit, and I said, "Hey, how did you do in the race?" Because he asked how I did, and I said, "Oh, whatever time I had." And I said, "How about you?" And he said, "Oh, I finished in, I can't remember the time, but it was like, 5 hours. It was like a whole hour faster than me, maybe even more than an hour faster than me." And I said, "Wow, man, that's pretty fast." He said, "Yeah, actually, I came in second in the race." And I was like, "Wow, okay, so you're really fast." And so we kind of like let the conversation dissipate, and we went our separate ways. And I got home, and the next morning I was just so curious about this guy. I'm like, wow, I mean, he looked really strong. He looked totally calm after doing this race. Meanwhile, I'm in the water like a complete wreck, my legs cramping. So I looked him up, and I could just see the race standing. So I could see, oh, the guy who came in second place, it's Kevin Cody. So I look him up, and kind of Googled him a little bit, because you can usually find what other races people have done. And I find this guy, and I'm like, holy crap, this guy is fast. And it turns out that he ran a coaching group called Triforce, and he was a triathlon coach, and he had a whole triathlon team, and a whole set of athletes that he coached. And turns out Kevin had already once before qualified for the Hawaii Ironman World Championships triathlon. And to do that is pretty remarkable, especially at the age group that he was in. It was in the 30s. I think it was like the late 20s, early 30s age group, which means you need to be really fast. I mean, you're finishing an Ironman triathlon in 9 hours, just over 9 hours, even sub 9 hours. So for context, like, the winners of these races now are coming in, at the time they were coming in at like 8 hours plus, 8.5 hours. So this guy was like top of his age group, top two, three of his age group, and which is what you would need to do to qualify for the Hawaii race. And I was like, damn, like, this guy is, I mean, he is a full out, all out Ironman triathlete. I mean, this guy is awesome. And so I was just so curious. So I just sent him a note on his website. I said, "Hey, man, I don't know if you remember, we chatted after the Napa Half Iron, and I'd be just really curious to hear more about your coaching." So he called me the next day, and for the next 2 months, he became my triathlon coach for this Ironman #2 that I was doing up in Boise, Idaho. And I share all this because those last 2 months of my training were completely different than the first 3 or 4 months of my training. What he introduced to me were all of the unknown unknowns. He introduced to me the idea of doing more speed work. So a lot of times you're doing very long races, you're just like, well, I got to get on the bike and I got to ride 50 miles or 75 miles or 100 miles. You're not really paying attention to your pace as much as you're just like, I got to get the miles in. And that's what people say, I got to get the miles in. The same with running or the same with swimming. I just got to get the yards in. I'm going to go do a 5,000 yard swim. You're just getting the yards in. And it's, yeah, I mean, you got to get the yards in. What he started to introduce to me was this idea of doing some pace work inside of these bigger workouts. So, okay, go do, instead of doing 5,000 yards, go do 3,500 yards, but every, couple hundred yards, do 50 yards at pace. So you're really moving at a faster pace. You're getting your heart rate up. You're doing some strength work in that sense. On the bike, I told him I was doing 2 to 3 rides a week, and he said, "Okay, we're going to do an extra ride every week. And it doesn't have to be a big ride; it can be like a 20-mile ride, but we're going to get more miles, and these are going to be smart miles, and it was going to be a heavy dose of speed work on that." And the same with running. He's like, "Okay, when you're doing your running, instead of just going at whatever pace, I want you to do some pickups." And I also want you to learn how to walk. And I want you to take a break while you're running. And so he introduced all of these new ways for me to train in those last 2 months. And then additionally, we started working on nutrition. So he knew I had this issue with cramping. And so he started talking to me, okay, what are you eating? How often are you eating? How are you measuring how much salt that you're taking when you're doing these races? And turns out the answer is like, well, I was just kind of eating when I was hungry and I was drinking when I was thirsty. And so he introduced to me a whole new set of systems on how to run my nutrition, both in my training, but also how to run my nutrition during a race. And so I went out there, did the second Ironman triathlon, and my goal was to finish in just under 12 hours because I'd finished 12:59, whatever. And so turns out I finished in just under 12 hours. I came in at 11 hours, 59 minutes, and something like 39 seconds. I mean, I just barely, I mean, with it was less than a minute that I beat the sub 12. But the point was, for me, I was like, number one, I set this goal that I thought I could attain. Number two, I am 100% sure I would not have knocked a full hour off had it not been for those last 2 months of training, because Kevin introduced to me new skills, new systems, new strategies, new ways to train, new ways to run those training days, new ways to think about what I needed to do in order to get to that next level. So that was my first like big foray into coaching when it came to my endurance training. Now the second one was when I ran the Western States 100. So the Western States 100 I've talked about before. It's one of the most prestigious 100-mile races. It's the first 100-mile ultra marathon that was introduced way back in the 70s. And since then, it's been growing in popularity. There's now 6, 7, 8,000 people every year trying to get into a race that only has 300 spots. So very, very highly competitive. I was able to get a spot because of our running club that runs an aid station. And because we were in an aid station, we're gifted one spot in the race. And because I've been very active in the running club and in the running community for several years, I was awarded this spot. So that's how I got into the race. So for me, it's like literally once in a lifetime. Like you may never get back into this race once you get in. Some people spend 10 years or more through the lottery system just to get into this race one time. And so I thought to myself, I want to do everything possible to take full advantage. And my goal for that race is to finish in sub 24 hours. I wanted to finish the race in under 24 hours. They give you 30 hours to complete the race as the cutoff. And then under 24 hours, you get what's called a silver buckle. Like literally it's a belt buckle. It's a silver belt buckle. And it's just it's considered like a pretty big award. If you can finish in under 24 hours on this course, it's pretty amazing. And so I decided to work with a coach. Now, Kevin is a great triathlon coach, but he's not an ultra running coach. And I've been listening to different podcasts and listening to different, watching videos and reading blog posts and doing all the things that I would normally do to get ideas on how to improve. And after listening to many different podcasts and listening to different coaches and different athletes getting interviewed, I felt like there was one person in particular that really kind of matched my personality. He was also in his late 40s. He also kind of subscribed to a more paleo, low carb, kind of high protein diet. Had a family, he's dealing with like running and managing his family while he's doing all the stuff that he's doing on the trail. And so his name is Jeff Browning. And Jeff is one of the most successful ultra runners in the world in history. So he set multiple course records at some of the hardest races. Even now, and he's over 50 years old, he's still winning races. It's pretty phenomenal. And so I filled out a form on his website and I said, listen, man, I've been listening to your podcast, like your interviews, read a lot of what you're doing, and I feel like there's a good match here. And it described him what my goals were and basically kind of applied to be an athlete of his. So we chatted on the phone and I hired him as a coach and he coached me through my training for the Western States 100. Now, while in that race, I came in just over 24 hours for all kinds of different reasons. One of which was the temperatures that day were over 100 degrees, which made it very, very difficult. There was a 33% DNF rate, meaning that over 300 racers started the race and more than 125 races didn't even finish the race. So I ended up coming in something like 60th place overall. 44 people in that race were considered professionals. So there's like 22 women, 22 men that were basically either have sponsors or expected to do really well in the race, won a spot in the race because they won a previous race. So there's like 44 like true professionals in that race. And I came in like 60 something. So I was really, really proud of that effort. And again, because of the strategies, the systems, the skills, the way of training, the way of using strength training, introducing strength training into my running, introducing new ways of getting more miles and smarter miles on my legs, introducing to me different diet, different nutrition, even though I'd already paid attention a lot to diet nutrition, just showed me new ways to adapt and get calories one way, how to make sure I'm getting enough salt in the races, how to measure my performance in new ways. He had a whole group on Strava where you could see other runners and what they were doing every single week. So it's just like a way of having a peer group of other runners, even though they're in different parts of the world that he was coaching to help motivate you. So again, I just want to stress like these different coaches, I have these goals when I do these races. It's not just to finish. I want to do as best that I can do. And I'm never going to win the race. I'm never going to come in a top 10. But what I can do is push myself to do as best as I can do to be my best self in these races. And by hiring these coaches, Kevin Cody and Jeff Browning, I know I came as close as possible to maximizing or optimizing my output. So it's just always grateful that I invested that money, invested that time to work with those coaches because they helped me see my unknown unknowns. They helped me introduce those new strategies, those new systems, the new skills. They helped me break through those upper limits so I could do more, be happy, and ultimately surprise myself. I was able to go farther in these races. Let's take a quick pause here and say thank you. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for listening to these episodes. As you might guess, I put a lot of time and effort, a lot of preparation into the content, into delivering this to you, because I know in the work that I do each and every day at Sales Qualia, working with startup founders and their teams to help them go farther with their businesses. I know from messages I get, I know from clients that I work with, I know from comments I get on my LinkedIn posts or DMs that people are sending to me or emails that I get that people appreciate that I'm doing this. And I just want to say thank you for listening. I would appreciate it if you would do 3 quick things for me right now. So number one, if you're not already following the show on your favorite podcast player, please go ahead and click the follow button. Subscribers are great for us because we know that more and more people are liking the content and making that part of their weekly flow in your podcast listening rotation. Number two, please leave a review on your podcast player, wherever you listen to this. If you're listening on SoundCloud or Apple Podcasts or wherever, leave a review. It helps the rankings of this podcast. It helps this podcast get recommended to other people just like you so that we can reach more people just like you with a message that I'm trying to get out here. And then thirdly, please do share this episode. Share it with a friend. Click right now. You can go to your podcast player. There's a little button that says share. Send a text, send an email to a friend, a couple of friends. Maybe it could be a co-founder, could be a partner, could be, somebody that you know that might benefit from some of what you're listening to. And just shoot it over to them. Say, hey, listen to the show, listen to this episode. I think you'll like it. Check it out. Viral is still the best way for us to grow the listenership here on the Startup Selling Show. Look, I've got an ego just like everyone else. I love seeing the stats go up. I love knowing that we're reaching more people. So the more that you can help me get the word out through word of mouth, meaning your mouth, the better for me, for the show, and for the people that don't know about this podcast. So please do those 3 things for me. Follow the show, leave a review, and please share it with some friends. Okay, so I just want to share a couple of quick examples of where I've used coaches on the business side of my life, and again, just ways that have worked for me. If anything here is easy for you to adopt and adapt, then that's my whole goal here. Just like you, or just as you might imagine, like a lot of the stuff that I've learned is from coaches that I've worked with, and so I'm just transferring this information over to you in some ways that I've adopted it and I've adapted it, right? So I just want to go through quickly where when I started Sales Qualia about 10 years ago. So in 2015 is when I officially launched the company as a separate entity where I was doing this full time. I'd been doing some side coaching, I've been doing some workshops, I've been doing some one-on-one coaching over the years, a couple years prior to that. But it was in 2015 that I made this a full-time effort. And throughout the course of the life of the company, I've had different coaches that have helped me out. And so I had two coaches in particular, even before I stepped away to make this a full-time endeavor, even when I was just preparing to make this a full-time effort. And the first coach that I work with is a guy named Dan Sullivan. Dan Sullivan. So Dan has been a coach for decades now, and he runs a program called Strategic Coach. And the benefit that I got from working with Dan was how to start thinking through how do I prioritize my time? How do I start thinking about what's most important? How do I get leverage on my time? So, for example, one of the things that Dan was is really, really focused on in his program was thinking through what are the things that you're really good at, like your genius zone that he calls it, your zone of genius. And what are some things that you are capable of doing, like you're sort of competent in doing, or things that you're not even very good at that you have to do every day, and kind of separating those two categories out. And the reason those became important is because the things that you're sort of competent at and maybe the things that you have to do and you're not very good at, those are things that you should start to look for help. So as an entrepreneur, one of the things that started to teach me was how to delegate tasks and how to focus more of my time on the more important genius things that are in my zone of genius, like creating content, working with clients, spending less time on things like setting up meetings, checking my inbox, doing marketing collateral, posting things on LinkedIn. So Dan was just really instrumental in helping me to start think through in a more structured way. How could I be managing my time to get the most out of the time that I had, especially in those times when I was working with Dan? Sales quality was still a part-time endeavor. I still had a full-time job. I was still trying to think about how can I grow this company to a point over time where I could be a full-time endeavor. And the only way I was going to be able to do that was to start thinking like an executive. And that was one of the things that Dan introduced me to through his program, Strategic Coach. So then the second coach I work with pre-launch, if you will, pre full time of sales quality, is a guy named Byron Davis. Byron Davis. So Byron was introduced to me from a good friend of mine named Jeff Turner. Jeff's somebody I've known for many years. He's been a multi-time entrepreneur, somebody I really respect and look up to. And he's been a bit of a business mentor for me. And I was telling him, I was like, look, I'm looking for like a very specific business coach who can help me with marketing, help me with thinking about positioning, help me with messaging, because I don't want to just like launch a coaching company and just kind of figure it out as I go. I want somebody who can really help me hone in to make sure that I'm doing the right things because I'm really good at sales and teaching sales, but not very good at marketing. And so he recommended Byron Davis to me. And so Byron and I worked together for about 9 months. And the thing that Byron really helped me with was accountability on my progress. So as I was working on sales quality as a kind of a side gig, as a side hustle, one of the things that's easy to do is kind of push things off. Say, well, I'll get to it next week, or I'm really busy this weekend because of my other work, my other job, or other things I'm doing. And he really forced me to be accountable in making progress every single week, even if that progress is small and incremental. By having these weekly accountability sessions, it helped me make sure I was making progress. And the other thing that he taught me was from a messaging standpoint, this is something really key that I've never forgotten. And this is something that I share with clients all the time is that when you're going out there on your own, you have to lead the crusade. You have to lead your crusade. You have to know what you stand for, why you stand for it, who are the people that you want to lead into their future. And that really stuck with me over the years because as I think about sales quality and I think about how I've developed the messaging, it's knowing that the crusade for me, it was sales quality. It was knowing that there's plenty of founders out there that might have great ideas. They might have great products. They've done some of the hard work to get those early customers. And they're engineers, they're product people. They might have a certain specialization, but they're not salespeople. And the crusade that I wanted to lead that I do lead every day is that those people are still capable of doing sales. Those people, as technical founders or as engineers or product people, they're all capable of learning sales because sales is just a process. Just like engineering's a process, just like product development is a process, just like fundraising is a process. There's a hiring process, the managing process. Everything in a business is a process. And it was always perceived and still is perceived many times that sales is just this thing that you do to people. It's a black box. You're either born as a salesperson or you're not. And that's not true. And that's always been one of my mantras. It's always been one of my crusades is to teach people that sales is just a process, step by step. It's a series of steps. It's like having a factory with a bunch of machines. You've got inputs and you've got outputs. And that's always been my crusade, if you will. And Byron taught that to me. And that's something that stuck with me for the last 12 years since I started working with Byron. And something that still shines every single day as we do our coaching program. So once I started getting into the full-time work, then I started working with a guy named Taki Moore, Taki Moore. So he coaches coaches, and his entire system is called Black Belt. And I worked with Taki for over 7 years as part of his coaching program. And the thing I loved about his program, it was a combination of his coaching. He had expert coaches in different topical areas. He did a lot of work as a group. So when you get onto coaching calls, you're not just working with a single coach, you're working with other coaches that have the same shit, the same challenges, the same issues, the same problems that you're dealing with each and every day. So you can see that you're not alone and also learn from the questions that they're asking. And then 3 times a year, he runs these huge in-person events where you go into this summit and you meet all of the other coaches from all over the world, where he's bringing in guest experts and teaching different systems, these different strategies, different systems, different skills. Later on, I worked with Monica Stewart, who I hired as a consultant, but really turned out to be a coach for me over the course of 2023 to help me see where I had gaps in my business, the unknown unknowns. And I just share this with you. So it's sort of this progression over time where even before I made sales quality a full-time effort, I was working with coaches to improve my mindset, to improve how I was running the business, to improve my messaging, and then working with people like Taki and Monica to continue and improve and find gaps in the business, the unknown unknowns, introduce those new strategies, the new systems, the new skills, so I can continue to break through those upper limits. And I would just really strongly challenge you to do the same, whether you work with like someone like me, if you're a startup founder and you want to get some more help with scaling your sales and building out a repeatable, scalable sales process, or any other coach that might be out there, I highly, highly encourage you because people like Beyonce, Taylor Swift, Larry Page, Steve Jobs, Sheryl Sandberg, they've all had business coaches and they've all had performance and voice coaches. If some of the top performers in the world need a coach to continue to get better, you probably could benefit from having one as well. So let's flip into specific strategies to help you get started with finding a coach. In a recent episode, I resurfaced an interview I did with Dan Waldschmidt just about 2 episodes ago. And one of the things that Dan talked about in terms of getting started with his framework called being edgy was one of the key things is writing down the people who might be able to help you with your endeavor and reaching out to those people. And this is where I think a lot of people have fear, their fear of rejection or their fear that they're not good enough to reach out to those people above them that have achieved more in their specific fields. And this is really the most important thing you can do first is ask for help. You've got to ask for help. And if even if you don't know exactly who could be your coach or who would be the right coach for you, ask the people around you. The reason that I found out about Black Belt is because I remember over a Christmas break, I was about 9 months ahead of when I was going to be stepping away from my full-time work and moving into doing sales quality full time. I was just working through some people who I liked and respect in my peer group. And there's a woman named Christina Wise who I met over the years. And I just reached out to her and I said, "Hey, Christina, this is some of the things I'm working on, this is things I'm planning. Do you have any suggestions of people that I might follow or subscribe to and sort of get a sense for how, like, who could help me?" And she gave me a list of people, but among the list of people she gave me was Taki Moore. And so I signed up for his email list and I started watching his videos and getting his newsletters and those sorts of things. And I got an invitation for a live event. He was going to be teaching an open event. It was a workshop. It was a 2-day workshop in San Francisco. And so I texted her. I said, "Hey, Christina, I just got this email, this event coming up in San Francisco. What do you think?" She said, "You must go. You absolutely need to go." And I went to this 2-day workshop with Taki, and that's when I signed up for his black belt program. Because in those 2 days, I realized all the things I didn't know. I realized all the things I was going to have to learn in order to be successful. I learned all of the frameworks that I didn't have in place. And worse, I, in some ways, I learned that I didn't have the strategy, systems, and skills to actually implement those frameworks. And it was because of me just simply going through my list of people that I respect in a peer group and said, like, who should I follow? Who do you think could help me? And asking for those recommendations. And so I'm always just I remember the day I was sitting in a coffee shop in Boise, Idaho over Christmas break. And remember this day where I reached out to Christina and she got back to me within a couple of hours and said, these are all the people that you should follow. So the first thing you got to do is ask the people around you who might be able to direct you to some folks that you might not have heard of. So that's my first strategy. Number two, you must be willing to pay for help. You must be willing to pay for help. I candidly get a little bit annoyed and a little bit frustrated when, on the one hand, it's great when people reach out to me on LinkedIn and they go, look, like I need some help with my business, or I wanted to get some perspective on what you're doing. And I get messages like, can I pick your brain? Here's my calendar. Can I get 45 minutes of your time to pick your brain? And I say, look, I'd love to be able to help. I'm pretty committed to clients. I'm pretty committed to the other work that I'm doing. I'm happy to help you. We run a strategy session. It's a 90-minute session. It's $1,000 where I'm going to help you identify the gaps in your business and help you build out a strategy to solve those problems. If you'd like to work with me in a session to help me get my eyes and my perspective on your business, happy to do it. Here's how. And over and over, 90% of the people or more I never hear back from. They're just not willing to pay. They're not willing to invest in that help. And as much as I'd love to be able to help everyone, I don't have infinite time. So whether it's, when you're reaching out to people, you can ask for help, but be willing to pay, even if it's offering to pay. A lot of times I'll offer to pay. I will go out to people and say, look, I saw that you're an expert in this area. I'm doing some research, and I've done this for clients that I've consulted with. I'll be researching a new area, and I've done this recently where somebody was a specific expert in a certain financial area. And I said, listen, I've listened to your interviews on podcasts. I saw you're speaking on the stage. I'm really trying to do some research for this client that I'm doing on. I was hoping I could get some of your time. I'd be happy to pay. Just let me know what your hourly rate is. And frequently those people come back to me and say, well, first of all, thank you for appreciating my time. I don't really bill by the hour, but if you want to grab 30 minutes, I'd be happy to make time for you. So just being respectful of people's time and valuing their expertise sometimes will actually get you some free advice. But ultimately, when it comes down to coaching, you need to be willing to pay for a coach. When I was first started working with Black Belt, at the time it was $1,500 a month. It's since probably almost doubled in price. When I started work with Monica Stewart, I wasn't necessarily looking for a coach or a consultant, but in working with Monica, I had her come in as a guest expert in my coaching program. And I was like, wow, Monica's really smart. And so I asked her, like, hey, if we were to put together like a 3 to 6 month engagement, what would that look like? And she sent me back a number. And I was like, okay, didn't really have the budget for it. I didn't have to set the money aside, but I looked at it and I was like, okay, if I have this person working on my business with me every single week, what's the value going to be? And it was easily worth the investment to work with someone like her. So know that if you're going to pay, you're going to pay attention, and the right coach is going to get you the return on that investment. Like when I worked with Jeff Browning, like I was paying many $100s per month to work with him. And that was for a hobby, just for something that's a cost center in effect for me. But it was so important for me to try to achieve that sub 24-hour time in the Western States. It was worth it to me. And my wife knew it was worth it. And fortunately, we're in a position where I had that discretionary income where I can do it. But you need to be willing to pay. The third strategy is like on top of your coach that you might work with, make sure that you're getting access to a peer group. I think it's really selfish for people as a coach. I think it's actually quite selfish if you only work one-on-one with people, because whenever I'm working with a client, inevitably every single time I work with one client, there are lessons that I can apply to other clients. And while I work with every single one of our clients one-on-one, I also have group sessions I also introduce live training where everyone is coming together. I also introduce guest experts because number one, I know I don't know all of the answers. And number two, I know the importance from being in coaching programs or having a group, a peer group around me to help get ideas, to help listen to their questions, to know that I'm not crazy and I'm not the only one that's out there. So I think as you're looking for a coach, make sure that it's not just one-on-one, because I think somebody that does one-on-one coaching and only does one-on-one coaching, I think they're probably robbing you. They're stealing from you in the ability to learn from what they're teaching to other clients that they have. The fourth is once you start working with a coach, you need to commit and engage. There's a reason you're hiring a coach. It's to push you, it's to teach you, it's to help get you out of your comfort zone. So you must be willing to get out of your comfort zone. And that's the job of a coach. That's why accountability is a big deal. That's why the coach that's introducing the unknown unknowns is so critical. And that's the fifth part, the fifth strategy is to make sure that you are constantly finding a coach that's getting you out of your comfort zone. Somebody that's forcing you to do the things you might not want to do or makes you feel uncomfortable doing them. If you have a coach that's making you do 20 cold calls a day, great. If that makes you feel uncomfortable. If you have a coach, one of the things that I encourage our clients to do is do a live event of some kind, a webinar, a workshop, a lunch and learn. And for a lot of our clients, it makes them feel uncomfortable to get in front of a group and try to teach them something. And that's the purpose for doing it. So you have to, keep doing the things that make you uncomfortable because that's the only way that you're going to grow. So those are your 5 strategies when it comes to finding a coach. It's number 1, ask the people around you for recommendations. Number 2, be willing to pay. Number 3, make sure that you are also getting access to a peer group. Number 4, make sure you commit and engage with that coach. And number 5, make sure that coach is getting you out of your comfort zone. So that's my episode for this week. Find a coach. Find a coach that you can do more, be happy, and surprise yourself so that you can go farther.